their faith but struggled to trust. Most of the time the experience has been through difficult places, or maybe big picture, this idea that there's an omniscient God who knows everything, yet there is the existence of evil, suffering, and pain in the world. It's a big theological moment. It's something that is a wrestling match to those who think at great depth and those of us who just experience life. It's tough to understand an all-knowing God in light of the struggles that we have to live life. But we have an opportunity as a group of people called the local church to help the world see God. Our mission statement, because people need to know Jesus, we make him known. So we do things like Light the Night, where maybe there's a celebration on that night for some of darkness, and here we choose to invite people to come. And as Pastor Alex said, maybe 1,000 people came through the building. And in those lives of those people were people who came and said things like, I've been looking for a local church for a while. I just moved into town, things like that. And we began to say, we embrace people right where they are, kids and families. Last night, the group of, I'll call them young adults because they're younger than me, but I consider that a privilege for them to be called young adults, went and played whirly ball, and we almost had someone who didn't show up because he got a whirly ball injury, I heard last night. Never heard of a whirly ball injury, Joe, before until what happened to you last night. I feel for you, buddy. You took one for the team. Thank you for that. But they played whirly ball together, and those people did that, and they gathered in those groups of people not simply to have a good time, but they were able to invite other people who are not part of this church to participate in life with them. And so that's how we walk into reality in people's lives, by engaging them. But I got to be honest with you this morning, part of my job as the lead pastor here, as the part of any person in leadership, is to define reality. Because when you don't live in reality, you may miss the mark terribly. So this morning, as tough as it may be to entertain certain subjects, which we will this morning, I do it because I want you to see reality. And I want you to see the opportunity in that reality. For most people, and me included, coming up through life in the church, we probably placed an unwarranted stigma on people who suffered from mental illness of any kind. A stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. And I'll just be honest with you, I grew up a long time ago, but I can remember the jokes about, and they'll probably put you in that home in Traverse City. Because at that time in my life, there was a mental health institution in Traverse City, and unknowing to, and in my immaturity, I would say, I made jokes about that. I put a stigma to those people who go to a place like that. In lifeguard training, the trainee is taught that there is great danger in life saving. They're like, wow, brilliant, Pastor. Another one of those things that, after the light of the day comes nighttime. I fill you in on all these truths every week to make sure you're an informed group of people. And by the way, thank you for looking a little more awake this morning. I do appreciate that. That extra hour thing. There's some of you whose heads are actually up now instead of like slightly down normally at this time of day. That's good. We have 2 grandbabies in our family, and apparently they didn't get the daylight savings time thing because their mothers were texting this morning about the 5 a.m. wake-ups of the babies. They didn't know, so they woke up. That's just nowhere. I have no idea how I got there, why I'm way over there on my grandbabies all of a sudden. It's nothing to do with what I have to say today, so I got to get back on track. Okay, so back on track. The lifeguard knows that it's dangerous to try to save someone too quickly. Is anybody here a lifeguard? Lifeguard training teaches the lifeguards not to save someone too soon. Why? Because unless the victim recognizes they can't save themselves, they are dangerous to the lifesaver. Many a lifeguard / person trying to save has perished because the victim didn't give up, didn't allow the lifesaver to do what the lifesaver could do, but in their own power struggled, causing not only possibly the loss of their life, but the life of the lifesaver. I want you to understand today, as we talk about these subjects, that human effort alone will not suffice. That's why we sang about the same power this morning. I picked out the songs on purpose to tell you that we need to recognize that the same power that raised Jesus from the dead exists in us in the person of the Holy Spirit, because when we tackle life stuff, that's what we rely on, is the power of God working within us. So I looked in my notes, crazy as it sounds, but on May 20th, 1999, I preached a sermon entitled Defeating Depression. 20 years ago, I preached a sermon entitled Defeating Depression, Little Did I Know. And with my personal experience, I now believe that preaching that sermon was like myself preaching to the congregation how to overcome morning sickness. There's a bit of a chuckle because you're going to get that in a minute, right? It was like me preaching a sermon on how to deliver a baby in 3 easy pushes. Because I never had the experience of depression, I preached a sermon on how to defeat it with absolutely no personal knowledge. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because you don't have to experience everything to know the truth. I can tell you certain things that I've never experienced that are absolutely true. I've never stood in the middle of the road and let a car run me over, but I know without doing that, that's a bad idea, okay? Right? But in this case, 20 years ago, I launched into this, no personal experience, and 20 years later, almost to the point of shame, I look at that file and I go, are you kidding me? You did that. Because life in these last 20 years has opened through experience a whole different matter when it comes to this. 48% of the people in a recent survey by the Southern Baptist Church said prayer and Bible reading alone will overcome depression and anxiety. Almost 50% of the people surveyed said all you need to do basically is be more spiritual to overcome these really tough life moments. The statistics are overwhelming. In 2014, nearly 16 million people over the age of 18 experienced at least one major depression episode or depressive episode. That's about 7% of the population. It's the leading cause is depression of disability in the U.S. from ages 15 to 44. There are different types of depression: major depression disorder, persistent depression, premenstrual depression, deep distortion, adjustment. I read all these things like I was clueless, but it helps me to understand how widespread this is. 45% of those people who suffer with depression, almost 50% of them, also show the same symptoms of one or more mental illnesses. 1 in 6 Americans take some form of psychiatric drugs. That's almost 17% of us. So here in this sanctuary today, we'll have, 200 to 300 adults? That's to say at least 30 to 40 adults in this place today are taking some sort of medication. 40 million people in the U.S. are affected by anxiety disorders. That's 18% of the people. So if you add the 16 million who are depressed to the 40 million who suffer with anxiety, we've got over 50 million people in this country who in just these 2 pieces of mental illness struggle this morning. 56 million people, and I just want you to know today, it's us. It's not them. It's us. If I were to ask you today, it might be embarrassing, so I didn't, but if I were to ask you today, if you're one of those people, more hands in this place would have gone up than you thought would have, and I would have been one. I am on an antidepressive medication. It's brought me to this place today where saying my personal journey changed entirely from 20 years ago when I wrote a sermon and preached it called Defeating Depression to today, a sermon I have to preach. It's the reality of depression and living with depression. And I know I'm not the only person, and I know I'm not the only person through history. I know that great preachers struggled with depression. I know Martin Luther struggled with depression. I know that the Psalms are filled with interesting moments. You read the 88th Psalm, and you tell me where David was at when he wrote that Psalm. That we have to define reality, and reality is we live in a world that's difficult. And there are several, and I won't name them today, causes for these mental illnesses. But I want to focus on today what the church can do about these mental illnesses. And I want you to get it in a personal fashion today. So I could tell you how many million people suffer, but I want to give you real life. So I'm going to invite Julie and Corey to come up because they're two of my friends to tell their stories. They come to this church every week. And I want you to hear about life from their perspective. So you guys, come on up. We'll use one of these worship mics because I can't find the other mic right now. Does it matter which one I use, Dwayne? Okay. Julie, you can use that table over there if you want to stand by the table, however you need to do it, but
Hi everybody, my name is Julie, and these are my friends, Anxiety and Panic. I take medication every day because I suffered in 2002. I was diagnosed with severe panic disorder. It's hard to explain what it's like to be trapped in your own head. I go through it every day. I come in here and I hear, like, I'm okay. People ask me if I'm okay. I say I'm doing good today. The truth is that a lot of times that isn't the case. My head plays tricks on me. And a lot of times I struggle with, I guess what you would call a form of normal because of my mental illness. I tend to worry excessively about things. If I'm saying the right thing, how you perceive me. I always wonder if I've said the right things. A lot of times, my brain tells me one thing when I know that's not the case. For an example, when we were here for like the night, we took down our stuff. Me and my daughter did trunk. I put the stuff in the hallway, meaning to take it out to the dumpster, but then got distracted and we left, and I left that stuff in the hallway. And from that day, even up to now, all I could think about was, oh my gosh, somebody had to pick up after me. They probably think I'm the worst person in the world because I left my garbage there and I didn't care enough to take care of it. I left it for somebody else to do. And those are the kind of thoughts that my head traps me in. That I'm not good enough. I will leave my house in such a crazy mindset that I will go back in and check my knobs on my oven, my stove, or check to make sure my curling iron is not on, and I haven't even used them that day. Because that is the kind of fear that my anxiety puts in my head. That something bad is always right there and is going to happen. My anxiety has gotten so bad that even now, if I travel somewhere, I will take a carbon monoxide alarm with me because I'm always afraid something's going to happen that is going to cause death or cause someone to be hurt. My anxiety and panic got worse in 2007 when my husband Phil was killed unexpectedly. They upped my dose by 60 milligrams from 20 milligrams because my panic was so out of whack that I was constantly throwing myself into attacks. I've been to the hospital several times because I thought I was having a heart attack. because I had all the symptoms, but it was my body and my mind that plays tricks on me. And every time I went there, they told me it's just your anxiety, you're all right. But I've been there several times. My husband, Ben, has many times rubbed my back while I was over the toilet because I felt like I was going to be sick. It's just a constant entrapment in your head and a constant feeling of not being good enough or being judged constantly. My son, because it's hereditary, he also struggled. But he kind of struggles in a different way because fortunately I was able to catch mine early enough that I didn't get to the part of having really bad depression. But Corey, on the other hand, he suffers with not only the anxiety, but he also suffers with the depression. So I'm going to let him tell a little bit about his experience.
Hey everyone. So what a lot of people might not know is there are different forms of anxiety. My mom's form comes in more of a paranoia state. She's always worried things are going to be left on, or stuff is going to get hurt, or things are going to catch on fire. She calls me and texts me constantly worrying about where I'm at or what I'm doing just to make sure I'm okay, because that's an effect of her anxiety. My anxiety stems from a more social side of it. I come from a mindset where I feel everyone's out to get me, and everyone's hostile, and that I should avoid at all costs. A lot of times I won't even talk to people because I'm afraid that they will judge me immediately because for no reason, just because my mind convinces me that they're out to get me, or that they won't like me, or they'll judge me, anything along that lines. So I kind of want to give an idea of, what it's like on a day-to-day life of someone with social anxiety. Because right now, you see what I'm doing right now. I'm talking in front of a huge crowd of people, which is kind of ironic considering I have social anxiety. But this is after hours and hours of convincing and pep talks to myself. And this is my top game right now. This is the best I can give. What you don't see is the behind the scenes stuff, where the days that I just need to shut down and I need to hide in my room for a day, and I need to just lock myself away from the world and escape to somewhere else, whether it be, taking a longer nap that day or getting on my computer and doing stuff on there. Anything to take my mind off what's going to happen next. And anxiety seems like it might be a more mild illness, and it can seem that way. My mind has convinced me that, it's not as important as a lot of things, and therefore I shouldn't get help with my social anxiety because there are a lot more important illnesses out there. So whenever I think that I should get help or anything, my mind's like, no, that's not important. You don't need to do that. You don't need help. Why would anybody want to help you when there's much bigger problems out there in the world? So that's a bit of my thought process that goes on. On top of that, not only do I suffer from social anxiety, I do have a form of mild depression that I go through. And some days it's a lot fewer and far between than it used to be. I used to have moderate depression after my dad passed away. And I actually just stopped going to school altogether in the 3rd grade. I missed an entire 4 months of school because my depression was so bad, and I was so sad and scared to go to school. Nowadays, it's gotten a lot better. I have maybe a breakdown every few months only, where I just need to not associate with people and be by myself. But I just want you all to understand that, just because I'm up here and I'm confident right now doesn't mean I'm not full of anxiety. and stuff. I'm terrified right now. And, just because I look healthy doesn't mean I feel healthy on that specific day. So don't feel, if you have to take a break day because your anxiety is bad, if you do have anxiety, or you feel like you need to just take a day off work or, not go to school that day, that's okay. It's important that you take a mental day, because mental illness can be just as bad as, regular illness or, something more important. Thanks.
So I just wanted to say too, as a church body, because we come here, this is just a building. The church comes when you come through that door. And I think it's important to know that a lot of times, like Corey said, we don't come right out. We don't have the self-esteem to come out and just say, hey, I'm really struggling today. My anxiety is super high, or I'm feeling kind of low today. But one thing that I encourage you to do is when you see somebody come through that door, if you make eye contact with them and they notice you, don't just turn away. Smile or approach them and talk to them, because sometimes that's all it takes, is to know that there is a friendly person there. They might not be able to come out and tell you what's really going on, but just knowing that there's someone there that sees them is extremely important to people that have depression, anxiety, because a lot of times when you think that you're alone or that somebody is judging you, that is the worst feeling in the world. And sometimes that leads to more. It leads to suicide. So when you know that someone at least noticed you when you came through that door, you could have saved them that day. So I just encourage you, if you do make contact with that person, eye contact, do something, say something, don't just turn away, because you could be saving somebody's life. So thank you.
Only you who have personal experience know what just happened and know what strength it took for both Julie and Corey to come up in front of a group of people and basically say, here I am. They risked literally everything, and it's not just from their perspective. It's to be vulnerable like that is a risky moment. And I want you to understand, as a group of people, what Julie just said and how important you are to every person you see. Don't see it as a burden, but rather see it as an opportunity that you may be casting literally a life-saving device at someone by just recognizing them and saying, how you doing? Good to see you. Ask an authentic question of them. How's your day? How's your week? And don't let them say okay when tears are streaming down their face. Embrace them and say, I'm safe. You can talk to me. Can I help you? Embrace that moment. I started preparing all this, and I said it won't happen in a week. So we're going to do next week at least one more week on this very same subject, because I want to take you to a place today in the scriptures and talk about this. And next week will actually be more practical about what you can do if you suffer from these. I don't want you to leave this morning totally in despair, but I'm not going to fill in all the blanks until next week. Some of my personal experience about things that you can involve yourself in when you are in these places of life. But I want you to open your Bibles this morning to this passage in 2 Corinthians in chapter 4, and now you'll realize why these pots are all over the platform. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul writes in verse 7, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. We have this treasure in earthen vessels. And literally the scripture is clay pots. It is pots or vessels that would have been crafted from the earth. The muds and the clays and the sun and the drying and all that. But if you've ever dealt with a clay pot, you know how fragile it is, don't you? So I wanted to do this message today in this clay pot thing, and so Kathy and I went and we purchased these clay pots, and I want to show you what happened in the transporting of the pots. I'm not sure why you're laughing, except for that you know, don't you? That even in the back of the car, this is what happened in the transporting of the pots, right? A whole pot began to be parts of a pot, right? But nothing could have been better for an example for you this morning than to happen like this. Because this is a lot more like life. See the big cracks on each side of this? Than these which have no cracks. The expectation of most people is when I follow God, no more cracks. Everything's whole, right? But to a person sitting in this room today, you recognize life has a way of cracking the pot. Now listen to this. This is awesome. Because what he says in the rest of this verse is this. He says, the surpassing greatness of the power of God. What happens in that cracked pot moment? You can't handle it. So Humpty Dumpty-ish, God puts the pot back together, but he doesn't restore it in the way you or I would like it to be restored. My experience is that he leaves the cracks. Because what happens is when his love pours into a cracked pot, it leaks out. It's actually a wonderful picture of what it is to know God. What it is to know God is to not deny life. It's not to walk away and say, everything always goes my way and I have no struggles, but to say, it's tough sometimes. And I feel like I'm busted and I'm cracked. Julie said it, right? She gets the phone call nobody wants to get, right? Julie gets the phone call, your husband's been killed at work today. And what happens to her pot? Huh? And Julie stands up here today and she looks a little like this. There's some gaps in Julie's life. Some cracks that are left. But you know what she did today? She said, God, I want you to pour your love into my cracked pot. Because there are other people in that room that need to know the love of God. And so what she did was she didn't deny her cracks. She didn't walk around, cover up her cracks, say, only see the good part of my life. I only want you to see the Facebook version. Right? Right? You know what Julie said? I want you to see everything. And this is where the opportunity of the church lies, is in a group of people that will come together and say, I'm okay with my cracks. It's okay to not be okay. Because what I am about to experience is that the love of God, the power of God, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, poured into my cracked pots, touches my world. Because these things here that look all whole and put together are what most of the people who don't come to church think the church is like. I can't come there because if they knew, if they had an understanding of my past, if they knew where I was last night, if they knew what I said to my wife this morning, most people think those people, they're just like this. Man, there's not a crack in them. Those are God's people. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Read your Bibles. Look at the characters in your scriptures. Look from the Old Testament to the New Testament. These are some cracked up people. They're liars, cheaters, murderers, and they became God followers. Come as you are, Jesus said, to fishermen who didn't know anything, Peter, who would end up being a liar, right? Denying Jesus 3 times. Crack, crack, crack. And then what did Jesus say? Hey, because you're all cracked up, I'll build my church on you. You see, the acceptance, the moment of us to understand that Moses didn't want anything to do with following God. I can't talk for you, God. The moment that he said, I'm not what I should be, the surpassing, the great power of God poured into his life. And in that moment, he became an authentic follower of God. An authentic follower of God. See, authentic followers of God are okay with their stuff. They're not on a journey to be somebody else or look like something else. Authentic followers of God go, it's okay, I'm a cracked pot. And there are days in the authentic follower of God's life where it's not just seeping out of their life, it's pouring out of their life because those cracks seem to be getting bigger and bigger. But what Julie said were those are the days that follower of God says to the rest of the world, I need help. And they don't deny the help that they need. Rather, they say, and look, this is incredible for me as a person. I didn't ask her this, but Julie brings those 2 bottles up there. You know what she says? I'm not afraid to tell you, I need help. Every day, I need help. Every day. So, I'm going to ask John to come. He's got some help for me this morning. He's got this. So, this is the practice that we're going to do, and you've never done this before at church, and you're going to have a good time. So, we're going to go ahead and put them right down here on the main floor. So, some of you, when you're talking today, you go, Pastor, you have no clue. And I'm like, I know, because your moment's different than my moment. But when you do this, what happens in your life is you are okay with the fact that life is like a hammer to your clay pot sometimes. Huh? And what happens is that moment in your life, I'm not going to describe it. It's almost unimaginable. I didn't want to wreck the carpet, everybody, okay? But frankly, this is life for you. That's what it feels like. That's what it felt like yesterday. That's what it felt like when your spouse died. That's what it felt like when you got your diagnosis, didn't it? Come on, be honest, didn't it? And you're like, God, this is me. I'm just a bunch of pieces now. You have this treasure in earthen vessels that's the surpassing greatness of God. And then read the rest of the passage. Read how he says we should be struck down. We should be this. We should be that. Paul begins to tell you that that's not going to be the outcome for your life. So on my desk, I have a couple pieces of this. One of them I took from a clay pot like this, and I wrote, "But God" on it. Because my recognition was, without God, this is all I would be, is a piece. So every day I look at that and I think, no, I'm just a cracked pot. And then people come by me and they say, that's for sure. That's for sure. We knew something was up with you. You are definitely a cracked pot. So this morning, we're going to sing a song that ends the service called Though You Slay Me. If you go on YouTube and look this up, you'll find this story. The author of this song, the person who sings this song, was traveling on the road with his band doing Christian music when he got the phone call from his mom that said, your dad has suffered a heart attack. He rushed back home, and the next day stood by his mom's side as his dad passed away. But he said, in that time, something happened. From the life of Job in the 13th chapter, where Job says, though you slay me, I will hope in you. He said there was an experience in his life that in the midst of the most difficult thing he could imagine, losing his dad, he began to praise God. He began to say, though you slay me, God, I'm not going to give up on you. Though you slay me, God, and I don't understand how you could know everything, God, and let this evil happen in this world. Though these things don't make sense to me, I've learned to live an and life rather than an or. Meaning what I've learned to do is accept by faith that there's an all-knowing God and that evil and pain exist. Rather than saying, God, you must solve this amazing equation for me. And so he wrote this song, Though You Slay Me. And during this song, I invite you to come and smash a pot. And you can smash a big one if you want to. If you got a big deal, smash a big pot. Some of you, there's 4 hammers, come and smash a pot. Some of you come and pick up a piece that you'll take home. And this is just a recognition that those crazy people led by the cracked pot guy at the Milan Free Methodist Church are okay with knowing that we have these fragile vessels that God has poured his love into, and we're not going to deny it. And we're going to love on each other in the midst of our cracks. But some of our greatest blessings will be as we see cracked people and watch the love of God pour out of their life. So, I'll let the band play. I'll leave the hammers and the pots.